So we're going to look at the Sabbath of the festival portion in Exodus 33. Focus in on that. So Exodus 33:12 through 34:26. And I want us to talk about kind of the context of this, how this is right in between God's instructions for constructing the tabernacle, his dwelling place, and the actual construction of the tabernacle. And between the instructions for the construction and the actual construction, you have the golden calf incident, and which leads to Moses and Adonai having this incredible, revealing conversation that basically leads to God fulfilling his purpose to construct the tabernacle as his dwelling place with Israel. So, hey, good to see you. So I'm going to read from this portion, beginning in verse 12 of Exodus 33. Moses said to Adonai, "See, you say to me, bring up this people, but you have not let me know whom you will send with me. Yet you have said, I know you by name, and you have also found favor in my sight. Now therefore, if I have found favor in your sight, please show me now your ways, that I may know you in order to find favor in your sight. Consider too that this nation is your people." And he said, "My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest." And he said to him, "If your presence will not go with me, do not bring us up from here. For how shall it be known that I have found favor in your sight, I and your people? Is it not in your going with us, so that we are distinct, I and your people, from every other people on the face of the earth?" And the Lord said to Moses, "This very thing that you have spoken I will do. For you have found favor in my sight, and I know you by name." Moses said, "Please show me your glory." And he said, "I will make all my goodness pass before you, and will proclaim before you my name, the Lord. And I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and will show mercy on whom I will show mercy." But he said, "You cannot see my face, for man shall not see me and live." And the Lord said, "Behold, there is a place by me where you shall stand on the rock. And while my glory passes by, I will put you in a cleft of the rock. And I will cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will take away my hand, and you shall see my back, but my face shall not be seen." The Lord said to Moses, "Cut for yourself 2 tablets of stone like the first, and I will write on the tablets the words that were on the first tablets, which you broke. Be ready in the morning, and come up in the morning to Mount Sinai, and present yourself there to me on the top of the mountain. No one shall come up with you, and let no one be seen throughout all the mountain. Let no flocks or herds graze opposite that mountain." So Moses cut 2 tablets of stone like the first. And he rose early in the morning and went up on Mount Sinai as the Lord had commanded him, and he took in his hand 2 tablets of stone. The Lord descended in the cloud and stood with him there and proclaimed the name of the Lord. The Lord passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for 1,000 generations, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children and the children's children to the 3rd and 4th generation. And Moses quickly bowed his head toward the earth and worshipped. And he said, if now I found favor in your sight, O Lord, please let the Lord go in the midst of us. For it is a stiff-necked people. And pardon our iniquity and our sin. Take us for your inheritance. And he said, behold, I am making a covenant. Before all your people I will do marvels, such as having not been created in all the earth, or in any nation. And all the people among whom you are shall see the work of the Lord. For it is an awesome thing that I will do with you. Observe what I command you this day. Behold, I will drive out before you the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Take care lest you make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land to which you go, lest it become a snare in your midst. You shall tear down their altars and break their pillars and cut down their asherim, for you shall worship no other God. For the Lord, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God. Lest you make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land, and when they whore after their gods and sacrifice to their gods, and you are invited, you eat of his sacrifice. And you take of their daughters for your sons, and their daughters whore after their gods, and make your sons whore after their gods. You shall not make for yourself any gods of cast metal. You shall keep the feast of unleavened bread. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, as I commanded you at the time appointed in the month of Aviv. For the month Aviv you came out from Egypt. All that open the womb are mine, all your male livestock, the firstborn of cow and sheep. The firstborn of a donkey you shall redeem with a lamb, or if you will not redeem it, you shall break its neck. All the firstborn of your sons you shall redeem, and none shall appear before me empty-handed. 6 days you shall work, but on the seventh day you shall rest. In plowing time and in harvest you shall rest. You shall observe the feast of weeks, the first fruits of wheat harvest, and the feast of ingathering at the year's end. 3 times in the year shall all your males appear before the Lord God, the God of Israel. For I will cast out nations before you and enlarge your borders. No one shall covet your land when you go up to appear before the Lord your God 3 times in the year. You shall not offer the blood of my sacrifice with anything leavened, or let the sacrifice of the feast of the Passover remain until the morning. The best of the firstfruits of your ground you shall bring to the house of the Lord your God. You shall not boil a young goat in its mother's milk. So that's the holiday portion from Exodus 33:12 through 34:26. And what really caught my attention this time as I was studying this is the larger context. Because in Exodus 25, all the way to the end, Exodus 40, it's really about the tabernacle. So look at Exodus 25 for a minute. Exodus 25, in verse 8. And let them make me a sanctuary, that I may dwell in their midst, exactly as I show you concerning the pattern of the tabernacle and of all its furniture, so you shall make it. So they come out of Egypt, and what did they make in Egypt? What's that?
Bricks.
Yeah, so they made the store cities for Pharaoh, right? Guess what that word is in Hebrew? They made Mishkan for Pharaoh. They served Egypt, they served Pharaoh, Avad, and they built Mishkan for Pharaoh. God calls his beloved Israel out of Egypt. He redeems them through the blood of the Lamb so they can worship him in the wilderness. So they can now avad him, they can serve him and build Mishkan for a loving heavenly Father, to come dwell with them as his people. So this path of redemption where God even takes these words of serving and building that were oppressive words that revealed malicious character. And he redeems even these words, and now they're going to serve and build for the loving God who redeemed them. Isn't that beautiful?
Yes. Amen.
How this beautiful, good God is revealed in redemption. This loving Heavenly Father is revealed in redemption. They went from serving and building from a context of slavery to serving and building to someone who loved them, who cared for them, who remembered them, who heard their groaning, who saw their affliction, who knew their pain, who came down and rescued them from Egypt to bring them into the promised land. But after Mount Sinai, not so much after, but after the event of Adonai coming down on Sinai, where basically he betroths himself to the nation of Israel. We can see this as the pre-incarnate Messiah betrothing himself to the nation of Israel and taking Israel as his people. It's like, well, that's not enough. He doesn't want to just be betrothed. He wants to dwell. He wants to live with. He wants to share space with his people. So in Exodus 25, verse 8, he reveals his heart. He's like, I want to dwell with you. He's basically saying, I redeemed you because I wanted to dwell with you. I wanted to be with you. And so then Exodus 25 all the way to chapter 40 is really about God wanting to dwell with his people. And our portion, though, that we're talking about, it's really interesting because before the portion, basically chapter 25 to 31, God gives 7 speeches about the building, the constructing of the tabernacle. Guess what the 7th speech is about? The Sabbath day. So you have 7 speeches, with the 7th speech being about the 7th day. So that 7th day speech is Exodus 31. So what does that remind you of? Creation. So you have God creating his cosmic house, right? His cosmic house, the universe. And on the 7th day, basically his creation enters into the Sabbath. And then with the tabernacle in 25 through 31, he gives 7 speeches about the tabernacle. And the 7th speech is about really his heart to dwell with his people on the Sabbath day, to dwell with his people Israel. So that's wonderful. This is the King. I created you to dwell with you, for you to dwell with me, for us to be one, for us to be bridegroom and bride, for us to walk together. There's something here of this beautiful revelation of the heart of God, right? That he's revealing here. This is the one he came down on Mount. Remember, he came down on Mount Sinai and betrothed himself. But then he gives these instructions for the construction of his dwelling place. He wants to dwell with his people, and there's something consummate that he wants for the Sabbath day with Israel. He wants to dwell with Israel on the Sabbath day. And that's like, wow, that's so beautiful. But then, right after this, where he's basically, this is like right after the betrothal ceremony, right after he reveals his intentions to dwell with his people on the Sabbath day, then the golden calf incident happens. After he just poured out his love, he poured out his heart, and then spiritual adultery happens. Right? So Moses is on the mountain, but down at the base of the mountain of God. And you need to know that the mountain of God, you probably have heard this in maybe some of the other Torah studies, the mountain of God was the dwelling place of God on the earth. This was the main dwelling place of God on the earth at that time. And it was broken up into 3 divisions. You had the summit of the mountain at the top, equivalent to the Holy of Holies. Midway, you had the holy place, right? And at the base of the mountain, you had the equivalent to the outer court. Only Moses could go to the summit. Only Moses could go into the Holy of Holies of Mount Sinai. Remember the 70 elders, Exodus 24, they went to the mid-range of the mountain. They could go into the holy place of the mountain. And the people were in the outer court at the base. So this was at this point in history, this was God's main dwelling place on the earth. It's called the mountain of God. It's the abode of God. He was dwelling on the mountain. Spiritual adultery happens at the base of the dwelling place of God. Just like Eden, this is where heaven and earth were connected. This was the dwelling place of God. And transgression happens in the dwelling place of God. Again, transgression is happening in the dwelling place of God. Spiritual adultery is happening in the dwelling place of God. This is what's happening in the golden calf. You see, this is intense. This is like almost like it's almost like a repetition of what happened in Eden. It's almost like it's happening again. God's revealing his heart to dwell with man, but yet man sins. And it's like, how does God respond? How does God respond? Why don't you look at verse 10 of chapter 32. Now therefore, let me alone, that my wrath may burn against them, and I may consume them, in order that I may make a great nation of you. What do you do when you're hurting? When you're feeling relational pain? Does it kind of sound a little bit like this?
You retract from.
You retract. Remember, he just poured out he just betrothed himself. He just covenanted himself as a bridegroom to this people and poured out his heart and gave these elaborate plans to dwell with them. Like, here's our home together. And he's up on the mountain talking to Moses, and they're down. And while Adonai's making these plans to be so intimate and so close with them, they're committing spiritual adultery. They're already breaking the covenant. And Adonai, not as a vengeful, capricious, malicious God. He's not saying that out of that heart. He's expressing his agony, his pain, his own suffering, because the one he loves is departing from him. Is departing from the covenant, and his heart is broken. He's broken. But him and Moses are such close friends that he's letting Moses kind of feel his rawness. He's not going back on his covenant. He's not going back on his ultimate desires, but he's kind of emoting a little bit. He's emoting. He's let the raw emotions. Can a perfect God have emotions and emote? Well, according to the Hebrew Bible, yes. According to the Hebrew Bible, yes. So, but he's seeking to elicit intercession. He's seeking to elicit a response from Moshe. Listen to verse 11. But Moses implored the Lord his God and said, O Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people, whom you have brought out of the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say, with evil intent did he bring them out to kill them in the mountain and to consume them from the face of the earth? Turn from your burning anger and relent from this disaster against your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, to whom you swore by your own self, and said to them, I will multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and all this land that I have promised I will give to your offspring, and they shall inherit it forever. And the Lord relented from the disaster that he had spoken of bringing on his people. The Moses comes down the mountain. He sees what the people are doing. He breaks the tablets because the covenant has been broken, right? He rebukes the people. He chastises Aaron for bringing the sin upon the people. Aaron kind of shifts the blame a little bit, so we kind of have a little bit like the garden again, where there's kind of this blame shifting happening. Nobody wants to take responsibility fully. The sons of Levi, right? They become kind of like Phinehas's, later Phinehas's, but they kind of are carrying that thing of righteousness. That even though God is willing to forgive, there's still going to be consequences. There's still going to be death, and God has no pleasure in the death of people. But there has to be consequences. And this is how the Levites are ordained to their priesthood. Which is pretty amazing. Which has a parallel with Phinehas later, right? So, because we can see that, because 3,000 end up dying, right? In verse 28 of chapter 32. And the sons of Levi did according to the word of Moses. In that day about 3,000 men of the people fell. So in Acts 2, on the day of Pentecost, when about 3,000 also on Shavuot get saved, God still is not, he still isn't forgotten. Like this was also these 3,000 on the day of Pentecost, because Shavuot or Sinai is connected to what? Pentecost, right? So Acts 2 is connected to Pentecost. He still hasn't forgotten the 3,000 who died. And 3,000 of his own people, Israel, get saved. Like, he doesn't forget. It's not like, oh, they died, let me just blot it out of my mind. No, he doesn't forget. He values every single one. There's something in his heart that I think was touched when those 3,000 on the day of Pentecost came in. This is the God of love. So it goes on, verse 29. And Moses said, today you have been ordained, talking to the Levites, for the service of the Lord, each one at the cost of his son and of his brother, so that he might bestow a blessing upon you this day. Let's keep reading. The next day Moses said to the people, you have sinned a great sin, and now I will go up to the Lord. Perhaps I can make atonement for your sin. So Moses returned to the Lord. So he goes back up to the summit and says, Alice, the people has sinned a great sin. They have made for themselves gods of gold. But now if you will forgive their sin, but if not, please blot me out of your book that you have written. So notice the contrast here. Verse 32, Moses says, if you're not willing to forgive them, if you're not willing to continue with your intention, to dwell with this people, then blot me out. This is Moses' response to what God said in verse 10 of chapter 32. Remember, God said, "Now therefore let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them, in order that I may make a great nation of you." Moses says, if you won't continue with this people, then blot me out. I don't, basically saying, if you're not going to continue with this people, then I don't want to be made a new nation out of. Blot me out. This is the true heart of an intercessor. This is the true heart. This is the true heart of God. Moses is actually revealing God's heart. He's not contradicting God's heart. God's bringing revelation of his own heart through his relationship with Moses. Moses is not the good guy, with God being the bad guy. God's bringing out of Moses the transformation he's been bringing in Moses to reveal his own heart. This is the heart of God, yes.
I'm sorry. But what about when God said earlier that I'm going to, I know it was his emotion and his wrath saying, "Leave me alone, let my wrath burn,
Yep.
and I'll make of you a great nation." So that was his heart. So when Moses says, "If you're not going to forgive them, then blot me out also," and then now that's his heart. So
Yeah.
it's kind of, I'm hearing two things. But I understand the
On the
heart, I
surface.
understand the hurt is the,
On the surface, it's two
it's the
things.
intercession.
It's on the surface, it's two things, but because God is, I mean humans have complex emotions. Like there might be things that I don't need to go into that. So humans have complex emotions, but how much more does God have complex emotions? Can God feel something, but yet his will is not to yield to those feelings? His ultimate will? What do you think?
Didn't Jesus do that in the garden? Lord, if it be your will, take this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but your will.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's a good question, and there's a tension, right? There's a tension there. I think if God would have went with those original expressions, would it have been righteous?
Yes.
Okay, so it could have still been righteous, right? So it
Yeah.
wasn't unrighteousness. We're not talking about unrighteousness. Because his betrothed basically committed adultery on him, right? So it's not his emotions, his reaction wasn't unjustified. There was still a holiness about it. I mean, the one he loved, his betrothed, was committing spiritual adultery. So it was even a right reaction. But Moses is basically asking God to have mercy. And this is where this famous phrase comes in, which we'll get to in a little bit, where God says, "I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy." But what we have here is God is basically saying, "I will not replace Israel." So this passage becomes foundational to God's heart towards replacement theology. Because even when his betrothed has committed adultery in the very dwelling place of God, every reason, justifiable reason, to basically replace Israel, he makes a definitive eternal statement that I will not replace her.
That's really awesome.
Can you see that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But even, let's say, he had said, okay, I'll just make it from you, Moses.
Mm-hmm.
Moses was still a descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So he was still he would have still remained faithful to the promise that I'm carrying this people. It's just like, but when you start with one and now we've got this massive nation,
Right.
you know, to start with one again would be a real drag.
Right.
But, I mean, when I look at all that, I'm sitting there thinking, for Moses to intercede
Yeah.
for these people who actually have not been real great to him either.
Right.
We haven't even gotten to how hard they make his life in the wilderness.
Right.
But they didn't really even trust him when he first showed up there. So it's not like, I'm gonna intercede for my best friend here,
Right.
you know, that
Right.
I've got this loyal thing with. He was interceding on behalf of, he obviously had a revelation of what God's plan was
Mm-hmm.
for that nation.
He did.
And he was interceding on behalf of that plan, not on behalf of this immense relationship he had with these people.
Right. But I think he did know that part of this plan was to have this,
Mhm.
the goal for this relationship.
Mhm.
So I think there's something of looking into the future and God's intention for this relationship, for that awesome relationship.
Yeah, well, I'm talking about Moses' relationship with the people.
Yeah,
of
he
God.
was, yes, yes, you're right, well said, well said. I would say though, there's something though about God's plan for the 12 tribes,
Mhm.
that I think if he were to wipe out the nation and start with Moses, there is something, even though he's still within the Jewish people, there is something of all the tribes wouldn't be.
True.
So I think because that's only one tribe, he's a Levite,
Mhm.
right? So it'd be like it still is kind of God saying, I will not replace this
Judah.
nation.
When you
You
think
know.
of Yeshua came through,
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah. So,
So-
you did something?
Go ahead.
Sorry. I was just, that's what I was just thinking is like
Yeah.
if he kind of starts again with Moses, he's doing away with this entire nation and structure that
Yeah.
he's already started to lay out. And I think Moses had an understanding of that,
Yeah.
even through the process of
Yeah.
the Lord revealing the plan for the tabernacle,
Mhm.
because the tabernacle is all about structure and it requires different people have different responsibilities
Yeah.
and just, you know, like he sees this establishment of how this nation functions. And also the other thing I've kind of, you were mentioning that this becomes foundational for a replacement theology. And I think that it also becomes foundational, which is very connected to replacement theology, for this concept of redemption.
Mhm.
Because even like what you've mentioned of, you know, in Egypt they were building Mishkan sanctuaries for Pharaoh, and now they're building the sanctuary for the Lord. It's this redemption,
Right.
and then and there's this redemption scene happening here with Moses being like, no, I don't really want to,
Yes.
you know, go back to square one. And it sets up this redemption for what's already happening. And then you mentioned the 3,000 in Acts 2. It's this
Right.
redemption of this rebellion, essentially.
Right.
It's like, it is like, it's so important. It's like, from here we know, like, God doesn't even like rework his people necessarily. Like, he doesn't even go back on his plan for his own people, like the structure of his own people. I don't know if that's
Yeah.
making sense,
Yeah,
but
it
it's
does make
like,
sense.
so then, you know, if God is consistent, if he is consistent in his faithfulness, despite the fact that he has these complex emotions and his heart is so grieved that he's like, I can't continue with this
Yeah.
because it's so hurtful to him, but still he's like, redemption, we're gonna bring redemption. And yeah, so it's just, and then it just carries on forth. So of course, like, you know, things continue to get complicated. There continue to be more complicated
Right.
emotions. Like,
Yeah.
the people continue to, you know, I'm even thinking of like, you know, later stories of the temple being desecrated and sin happening on the Temple Mount and all of these.
Repeating again.
Yeah,
same
it's like history
story.
seems to repeat
Yeah.
itself, which is really discouraging on one
Yeah.
sense, except for the fact that God continues to bring redemption.
He does.
And every time he brings redemption, it's in a greater way.
Right.
So
Yes.
it's really cool to see that how he's so redemptive,
It's excellent.
even in these moments of when he's first bringing them out
Yeah.
of Egypt and actually setting up this nation
Yeah.
at this point.
It's good. So for those who are coming in, so we're looking at what we're talking about now in the context of, so chapter 25 through 40 is about really the tabernacle. Chapter 25 to 31 is God's instructions to build the tabernacle. And he picks up in chapter 35 with the actual construction of the tabernacle. All of this is happening in between. All right, so that's just a little bit of a review. Let's continue with verse 34. So he just said, blot me out of the book. Like if you're not going to continue your plan with Israel, blot me out of the book. Moses says, but now go, lead the people to the place about which I've spoken to you. So this is what God's saying. But now go, lead the people to the place about which I've spoken to you. Behold, my angel shall go before you. Nevertheless, in the day when I visit, I will visit their sin upon them. Then the Lord sent a plague on the people because they made a calf, the one that Aaron made. The Lord said to Moses, depart, go up from here, you and the people whom you have brought up out of the land of Egypt, to the land of which I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, to your offspring I will give it. I will send an angel. I don't think this is the angel of the Lord here anymore, personally. Because listen, he says, I will send an angel before you, and I will drive out the Canaanites, the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, go up to a land flowing with milk and honey, but I will not go up among you, lest I consume you on the way, for you are stiff-necked people. Conversation's continuing. When the people heard this disastrous word, they mourned, and no one put on his ornaments. For the Lord has said to Moses, say to the people of Israel, you are a stiff-necked people. If for a single moment I should go up among you, I would consume you. So now take off your ornaments, that I may know what to do with you. Therefore the people of Israel stripped themselves of their ornaments from Mount Horeb onward. Now Moses used to take the tent and pitch it outside the camp, far off from the camp. And he called it the tent of meeting. And everyone who sought the Lord would go up out to the tent of meeting, which was outside the camp. Whenever Moses went out to the tent, all the people would rise up, and each would stand at his tent door and watch Moses until he had gone into the tent. When Moses entered the tent, the pillar of cloud would descend and stand at the entrance of the tent, and the Lord would speak with Moses. And when all the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the entrance of the tent, all the people would rise and worship, each at his tent door. Thus the Lord used to speak to Moses face to face as a man speaks to his friend. When Moses turned again into the camp, his assistant Joshua, the son of Nun, a young man, would not depart from the tent. Which brings us to verse 12, which is the beginning of this holiday portion, which we already read at the beginning for those who came in late. So then, and what we read, let's since we have some people that weren't here at the beginning, let's keep reading. Exodus 33, verse 12. Moses responds. He says to the Lord, see, you say to me, bring up this people, but you have not let me know whom you will send with me. Yet you have said, I know you by name, and you have also found favor in my sight. Now therefore, if I have found favor in your sight, please show me now your ways, that I may know you in order to find favor in your sight. Consider too that this nation is your people. And he said, my presence will go with you. So finally God says, my presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. And he said to him, if your presence will not go with me, do not bring us up from here. For now how shall it be known that I found favor in your sight, I and your people? Is it not in your going with us, so that we are distinct, I and your people, from every other people on the face of the earth? So you see this? Now this is going to be realized in chapter 35 through 40 with the construction of the tabernacle. How did his presence go with them? Yeah, but it was in and through the tabernacle. Like a lot of people, I think sometimes people take this verse out of context and don't realize this is connected to what came before. Here's my instructions for building the tabernacle, and chapter 25 through 31, and then chapter 35 through 40, the actual construction of the tabernacle. So my presence will go with you is his commitment to actually do the actual construction of his dwelling place. Are you seeing that? So, yes, his people did commit spiritual adultery at his very abode, Mount Sinai. But yet, Moses is going to go up, and Adonai is going to make atonement, right? He did that. He did that already? Or he's doing that? Where are we at here? Yeah. And so that God can dwell with his people. So let's pause there for a minute. Interact.
Just keep thinking how great conversation that is between Adonai and Moses. Just good.
Right.
Kind of an example of how we could be with him in relationship, not just like this.
Right.
Oh, but I mean he is, but at the same time, he wants to have a relationship with us, and
Yeah.
here Moses is just talking to him,
Yeah.
He's Adonai's being very like vulnerable, like he's like kind of just being.
Yep.
We don't think of him like that, but
Right. It's also who wants to be a friend of God? So what does this tell us about what friends of God care about? Was he a friend of God just caring about his own individual relation with God? Or his own destiny? God offered him a promotion. I can start over with you and have a whole nation through you. God offered Moses a promotion, and Moses turned it down because he was a friend of God. God offered him what people could see as a higher destiny. And he turned it down because friends of God care about the name of God. And God's name would be better honored by the preservation of Israel than him starting over and making a new nation.
And he wanted the fullness of the covenant that the Lord made.
Amen.
I mean, that's huge. I want the fullness of that covenant.
Yeah.
I was also sitting there thinking where he said, if you won't go with us, it would be like when they were in Egypt and they were building stuff for Pharaoh that those gods didn't really even dwell in. So why do we want to carry around something that God's not dwelling in? I mean, it would be just like every other building that they built that had no meaning.
Yeah. Yeah, and they hadn't even built it yet.
Yeah.
So I mean, it could have been even like, I mean, the proposal for okay, lead them up to the land that I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but I'm not going to go with you, could be seen as even a halting on, well, let's actually not build it for my dwelling place. We'll just send an angel. But that wasn't God's heart. He wanted that. He wanted that sanctuary to dwell with his people, and Moses knew that.
Yeah.
He wanted the full manifestation of the covenant.
Well, that's why he brought him out,
Right.
was to dwell with him.
Exactly.
And Moses knows that because that's what it even says in
Yep.
16. Isn't it because you go with us that distinguishes from all the people on the face of the earth? It's like other gods, you screw up and they bail.
Right.
Like that's the entire, that's the ancient construct, right? It's like you're doing everything you can to please the gods so that they stay and that
Yes.
they don't wipe you out. This God is categorically different. That he's
Yes.
like, no, these people really screwed up, and he's going to stay, and that's what sets them apart. That's
Yes.
what makes them this set apart nation, this holy nation. That their God stays with them.
Yes.
And Moses is like, if you leave, you're just like all the other gods. You're not really the God that you say you are.
Yeah, exactly. Which would bring dishonor upon his reputation.
Mm-hmm.
His covenant faithfulness brings the revelation of the honor of his name. It's good. It's kind of a big deal, this whole section. I mean, it's like, it's intense. Any other people have thoughts, interactions on this? What's that?
Just trying to just think about what you guys are saying.
So when you think of the calling of Israel, do you think of what Moses is saying? That what is to distinguish Israel on the earth is the presence of God. That's what Moses says, right? I mean, he's saying the presence of God with his people is to be like a distinguishing mark. So like as a messianic congregation that's attached to the Jewish people, like a distinguishing mark, if we're fulfilling God's calling, is the presence of God. But this is God's heart for the whole nation of Israel.
It's encouragement. So, bring encouragement or praying for him because we already know his heart is for him. I mean, we've known this, but to continue to remember that his presence and his with him, and he even says he will not leave him. But just keep remembering that that's his heart, his presence is always with him. That's his heart, that he's not going to forsake him. That's his heart, that he's dwelling with him. So when we're praying, it's just we're agreeing, and it just brings power to the prayer, to the agreement.
It's good. It's good. It's good. All right, let's keep reading in verse 17 of chapter 33. And the Lord said to Moses, "This very thing that you have spoken I will do. For you have found favor in my sight, and I know you by name." Moses said, "Please show me your glory." And he said, "I will make all my goodness pass before you, and will proclaim before you my name, the Lord, Adonai, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. And I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and will show mercy on whom I will show mercy." This is one of the most taken out of context verses in the whole Bible. In Romans chapter 9, this is quoted, and it's so taken out of context. And it's turned into this an eternal predestination of individuals to salvation and eternal predestination of individuals to damnation. And that's how it's presented. And it's so taken out of context. The context here is, remember, his bride, in essence, just committed spiritual adultery at the foot of the abode of God, at the foot of the holy mountain of God. He doesn't owe her mercy. He can say, you've broken covenant. He's not wrong for saying that. But if he wants to show mercy and restore his bride, he has the right to do that. He has the authority. He gets to choose to do that. So in Romans 9, where much of Israel, right, is not accepting the bridegroom in the flesh, right? A portion of Israel is, a portion of Israel is not. And he's expanding his bride to include the nations. But he has the right to not replace Israel. He has the right to still pursue mercy for her. And that's more of the context of Romans 9 through 11. Because Romans 11 ends up with, let's turn to it briefly. When you take the Bible outside of its historical Hebraic context, you end up with such distortions. Look how Romans 11 kind of comes to a fullness. Beginning in verse 25. "Lest you be wise in your own sight, I do not want you to be unaware of this mystery, brothers. A partial hardening has come upon Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. And in this way all Israel will be saved, as it is written, The deliverer will come from Zion. He will banish ungodliness from Jacob, and this will be my covenant with them when I take away their sins. As regards the gospel, they are enemies for your sake, but as regards election, they are beloved for the sake of their forefathers. For the gifts and calling of God are irrevocable. For just as you were at one time disobedient to God, but have now received mercy because of their disobedience, so they too have now been disobedient, in order that by the mercy shown to you, they also may now receive mercy. For God has consigned all to disobedience, that he may have mercy on all. This is actually filling out this application of God will have mercy on whom he has mercy. Let's go back to Romans 9, where we have this quote from Exodus 33. Romans 9. Look at verse 14. What shall we say then? Is there injustice on God's part? By no means, for he says to Moses, I will have mercy on whom I have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I have compassion. He's quoting it. Go back to Romans 9. We have a new figure that's operating after the pattern of Moses, the Apostle Paul. Listen to his intercession. This is all has to be understood in the context of Exodus. Romans 9, verse 1, I am speaking the truth in Messiah. I am not lying. My conscience bears me witness in the Holy Spirit, that I have great sorrow and unceasing anguish in my heart. For I could wish that I myself were accursed and cut off from the Messiah for the sake of my brothers, my kinsmen according to the flesh. Basically, blot me out. They are Israelites, and to them belong the adoption, the glory, the covenants, the giving of the law, the worship, the promises. To them belong the patriarchs, and from their race, according to the flesh, is the Messiah. You see how this is all? You've got to understand Exodus to understand Romans 9 through 11. So God's, I'll have mercy on whom I have mercy. Yes! They're not doing what I want them to do. They're breaking covenant. I have every reason to replace them. I have every reason to reject them. But I get to have mercy on whom I have mercy on. This is why go back to Exodus 34. What's the first thing he says about himself when he comes down on Mount Sinai? This is Yeshua on Mount Sinai with Moses revealing the name of the Father. Because you have two Adonai figures on the mountain in Exodus 34. Let's look at this. Verse 5 of Exodus 34. The Lord descended in the cloud and stood with him there. So we have one standing. This is pre-incarnate Yeshua. So we have one standing and proclaimed the name of Adonai. So you have Adonai proclaiming the name of Adonai. You have the Son proclaiming and revealing the Father. The Lord passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord, a God what?
Merciful.
Compassionate or merciful? Merciful and gracious. The Lord. The one whom, what does he choose to start with? His mercy. But remember, what's the context here? His bride just committed spiritual adultery. And there's been this whole conversation going on between Moses and Adonai. And Adonai's basically said, yes, but I'm going to restore them to covenant. That's why Moses goes and gets new tablets, right? And God's revealing himself as this God of mercy. Yes, he's a God of mercy. He's gracious. He's slow to anger. He's abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. He keeps steadfast love to the 1,000th generation. He forgives iniquity and transgression and sin. But he will by no means clear the guilty. So he's not going to do away with his justice. He's not going to do away with the consequences of sin. But there is an emphasis here on the mercy of God. Yes?
And just to bring the new covenant in, Jesus or Yeshua said twice in Matthew 9:12 that I desire mercy and not sacrifice.
Right? Right?
And the Micah 6:8 comes up too. Do justly,
Yeah.
have mercy, walk humbly.
Yeah.
That's what the Lord requires.
God is not a vindictive, capricious God. Now, if people say, "Oh, God's gracious and merciful, therefore I can go and sin," no, that's a total misrepresentation of what we're talking about. If you really understand this God of mercy, you won't want to sin.
May it never be.
It may never be. You'll have an attitude, wow, I don't want to sin. I don't want to break my connection with this good, beautiful heart of God. I want to protect my heart union with Him. Right? So look in chapter 35. See, in chapter 5, now we're transitioning back to the construction of the tabernacle. But first he starts with, again, instructions about the Sabbath. Chapter 35, Moses assembled all the congregation of the people of Israel and said to them, "These are the things that the Lord has commanded you to do. 6 days work shall be done, but on the seventh day you shall have a Sabbath of solemn rest, holy to the Lord. Whoever does any work on it shall be put to death. You shall kindle no fire in all your dwelling places on the Sabbath day." Moses said to all the congregation of the people of Israel, "This is the thing the Lord has commanded. Take from among you a contribution to the Lord. Whoever is of a genuine heart, let him bring the Lord's contribution." And basically, we're talking about now the construction of the tabernacle. So, chapter 25 to 31, instructions about building the tabernacle. 7 speeches, the 7th being Sabbath day. God wants to dwell with Israel. He wants holy communion with them on the Sabbath day. Then we have spiritual adultery. Then we have this whole process of restoration. God comes back. He reiterates the Sabbath day, the sign of their holy betrothal covenant. Right? It was a sign of His desire to dwell with Israel. So, we think God can be harsh here with the Sabbath, but it's not that at all. The Sabbath was is a sign between Israel and the people. So not honoring the Sabbath in ancient Israel basically said, "I'm not coming home tonight." It's like a spouse that'd be like, "You know what? I'm not coming home tonight. I'm sleeping somewhere else tonight." Or it'd be like throwing off the wedding ring. It wasn't about a capricious God. It was about a holy, burning, loving bridegroom God. And the Sabbath was a sign of their marriage covenant. It was a sign of coming and dwelling with God in His presence in holy rest with the King. So, and then chapter 35 to the rest of the book is the construction of the temple or tabernacle. And then it ends, look at the ending, chapter 40. Chapter 40, verse 34. Then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. And Moses was not able to enter the tent of meeting because the cloud settled on it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. And God goes with his people. Throughout all their journeys, whenever the cloud was taken up from over the tabernacle, the people of Israel would set out. But if the cloud was not taken up, then they did not set out till the day that it was taken up. For the cloud of the Lord was on the tabernacle by day, and fire was in it by night, in the sight of all the house of Israel throughout all their journeys. God goes with his people. Now, why is this important? Well, next week's Torah portion includes Leviticus 9, which is the inauguration of the tabernacle. There's an inaugurated tabernacle event in Leviticus 9. So understanding this special holiday portion will bring more depth and meaning to next week's portion. So let's just review. So what did we talk about today? So someone try to capture the essence. Doesn't have to be comprehensive, but just share some thoughts.
He establishes relationship with his people.
Okay, establishes relationship with his people.
His boundaries.
Good.
His covenant had a lot of mercy regardless of their behavior or their honoring the covenant.
Okay.
Merciful covenant.
His covenant had a lot of mercy. A lot of mercy. Good. Others? Takeaways?
I think that, like what we talked about, just the relationship between him and Moses, and how we can have that relationship, but not only that, but it shows how we are image bearers.
Yeah.
Because I thought of, like, when you were talking about how he was being, like, he could have easily just said, no, you're done.
Right.
Moses, I'm just going to bring through you. How a lot of times when we get angry with people, our first thought is like, no, or I'm angry, and you have to think it through.
You have to think it through,
Yeah, and say,
That's
no,
good.
that's not right to just be this way. I mean, maybe I've done that to somebody before, or maybe, you just shows that how we are image bearers of him
Yeah.
through just that whole section.
That's good. And we're to carry his name as image bearers. That's good.
It's just showing that relational nature of God. That
Relational nature of God, yeah.
He invites us into this, ruling and reigning in a partnering way, such that he's not a cosmic dictator, that he's unbending and unmerciful. He invites us to enter in and manifest his own presence and his own will and ways to him, and that's he's trying to bring out of us his own nature.
Yeah. It's good. What does this tell us about God's heart for Israel?
The whole thing is at the beginning of his story that he's demonstrating and proclaiming to Moses, with Moses, for his people. It's like the whole framework for how he feels about him, and what he's doing, what his plan is for, like you say, the building of a tabernacle, and his heart of compassion, saying he's with them always. So it's the beginning of all of his, like, not all of his thoughts, but his thoughts and his plan, because of, he said, you are my special people, you're my nation, you're my holy people. It's like the beginning of that conversation, the whole story of God's and his family. The beginning of the story with his family. And so, like you say, it's reflected all the way through. So the beginning of the story reflected in Romans, reflected in Revelation.
Yeah.
And so, like, that's that framework. I don't have a lot of good words to say.
You're doing great.
That's what I saw.
You're doing great.
Just, it made me question, just do we bear his mark out there, besides here at Shabbat? Do we bear see the presence of the Lord in us.
That's great. Yeah. That's good. That's good. What does it tell us that we have in the book of Exodus 15 chapters basically devoted to the tabernacle? What does that reveal about God? What's that? It's important. So what does it reveal about his heart, his intentions, not just for Israel, but for all humanity? What does it reveal about his heart?
To dwell with men.
He wants to dwell with men.
It's hard for relationship.
It's hard for relationship. Anybody want to build on that?
It's very specific about building it. And you're gonna build it just so according to what, so this is how you build the tabernacle that I'm gonna dwell in. So I'm
Right.
gonna put my name. So how you build, it's how the Lord wants to build it. Exactly
Yeah.
how he says. Because it says, in other parts, God doesn't build it, you labor in vain. So
Right.
it's how God wants to build his dwelling place. So go with, you have to be in covenant relationship, just so how God says, just the Shabbat, just how God says. Because it's his plan.
Right.
And but he doesn't do it like a hard task, but he does it with his compassion. His love for you. That's his love.
It's good.
And it's bringing heaven to earth. It's patterned after the tabernacle. Earthly tabernacle is patterned after the heavenly tabernacle. So it's this heaven and earth touching. So he wants to dwell with us by bringing heaven to earth.
It's good.
And your will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
It's good. So that prayer, that the Lord's Prayer, think of the Lord's Prayer with the same heart Moses had or Paul had. And I think because Yeshua, when he gave that prayer, he has that heart of intercession, that heart of, I want the fullness of the covenant. I want the fullness of God's name being honored on the earth. It's good. Others? Got more?
I just picture him drawing a line. This is where we go.
Right.
And, follow me. And then some step out. But he continues, if they pick themselves up and run back in it, and he's going to forgive us if we're having change, but it's stuff that he doesn't change.
He doesn't change.
It's like when we discipline our children, no matter how much they whine or what they do, we don't give in, but they know that we have integrity and we love them. They may suffer along the way.
Right. No, it's good. I think discipline is good because there is discipline in these chapters, isn't there? But discipline doesn't mean rejection. And even God does some very strong discipline. But it doesn't, to interpret his strong discipline as rejection is to misrepresent his heart. Anything else, Keith? Nassim, you got anything?
I got a lot of things.
So let's pursue the heart of God. Let's close with that. Just like I want to encourage us as a family to pursue the heart of God, to know the heart of God. It's one of my burning passions. Just any part of the Bible, I want to get to his heart. I don't want to miss his heart in any part of the Bible. It's like one of my hermeneutical principles. I need to find the heart of God in every part of the Bible. I want to see it. I don't want to misrepresent it. So let us be a people who know and pursue and represent the heart of God. Amen? All right.